Do you see AI actually creating some of these logic flows over time, or do you think this will be something that remains pretty human?
One of the things that we think about is if you think about a really good human support agent, the logic kind of lives in their head. And if you need to update it, you just like talk to them. It's like, okay, next don't do this, like do this instead. And they're like, something in their brain updates and like now they've learned, right? So I think a similar thing will happen with agents. And that's an area where probably like we've been like super differentiated there so far, that we really invest in that step of giving a feedback and having an update instead of, having to, call us every single time. And again, we will often be the ones that like maintain things and update things for folks, but it's kind of this sort of feedback loop where the agent is already agentic talking to the customer, but there are agentic components that you could build on the other side of like teaching the agent how to do things. Yeah, I think that's like a big area of research still. I think there's like a lot of things for people to do.
Okay, Jesse, thank you so much for coming. There are a lot of canonical AI use cases that everyone is talking about right now. So code gen is obviously one major category. Customer support is another, and Decagon has emerged very quickly as one of the leaders in this customer support category. So I'm excited to get into it and get into the nitty-gritty details with you. Thanks for coming on.
Me too. Yeah, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation.
I love it. So you don't come from a customer support background. You did math competitions, you studied computer science at Harvard, graduated quickly in quant trading, you were at Google, and then your last company, which you started right after undergrad, was in consumer. So my first question is, how did you end up building a company for customer support? Why is this where you landed of all the many things that you could have done?
Yeah, for sure. So you're right. My last company was in consumer. Before that, most of my background was in math, computer science. I studied a lot of like CS, AI stuff at Harvard. I think really the first company, I spent a lot of time just doing all sorts of stuff, right? Because when you're starting a company, it's not just like building the product. One of those things was our support. And so when you're doing consumer, you just have a lot of users, people have a lot of questions, and even if they're not paying you, right? There's like questions. And so large volume, I was pretty much the one that managed it. Like I have like pretty deep appreciation for both the problem and also like the tooling that exists for it. So like when we were setting up automations and simple things, that was mostly me. I wouldn't say that just through that experience, it made me want to start this company. There's a lot of other factors. For us, we were very interested in AI agents, of course, like a lot of people. We also had learned that you really need to not overthink the ideation phase and like try to pigeonhole yourself or like try to push yourself towards different directions just because maybe you had experience in something before or you think that the direction is cool. So the motivation for the company was really just we talked to a lot of customers and this use case was really stood out. And to be fair, I think since Ashwin and I had both started companies before, we were a lot better at the discovery process this time and like fishing like insights out of these conversations. And that's what led us here. And to your point, I think in hindsight, it turned out pretty well. This space and coding have probably been the two clear use cases for AI, just like Gen AI in general, but also agentic workflows. So
I'm curious about that because you said you've gotten better at that discovery and ideation phase. And a lot of folks who want to go out and start companies, they say, I want to do this. I don't know exactly how to go about that. Do you have any tips from getting better at discovery?
Yeah, discovery is one of the hardest things because people will, like everyone knows that you have to go talk to your customers and YC, for example, like the whole
Although not everyone does it, but everyone knows it. Yeah.
like make something people want. It's like, okay, yeah, you got to talk to customers. If you're not talking to customers, you should be building a product. Don't waste your time doing other stuff. Like I think there's a lot of, not platitudes, but there's a lot of like kind of general advice like that. And so I think, talking to customers is one thing. I think doing real discovery is pretty difficult. I would not claim that we've mastered it. Even today, like in terms of how we build new products and like which things we should focus on, and like which features actually deserve spending a lot of engineering effort on. We still do a lot of discovery, and there's always ways we're finding to get better at that. One of the most important things with discovery is like you need to separate like asking questions, like talking about features, talking about product from like what value they actually get. And sometimes that's pretty hard to quantify. Like sometimes someone will be super excited talking to you about something, and maybe it's because they're like legitimately interested in it, or maybe it's because they kind of owe you something because you're on a call with them and like it's a discovery.
They want to be nice.
Exactly. And if you don't want to really get signal for like how valuable it is kind of a waste of time and or you just go down the wrong path. So you find the motivation, like find, some sort of maybe like price tag assigned to it to get a sense for how valuable something is.
Do you have any concrete example, whether when you were starting the company or now, where you're like, okay, we know before we went out and built it that someone is willing to pay or that there is some value here and it's worth pursuing to really pin the point down?
Yeah, this is actually pretty easy to do when you're first IDE. Like when you have no product at all, you just talk to people and it's like, hey, if I built this for you, how much would you pay for it? And if that number is not high, then it probably means they don't care that much about it, even if they're super excited. So when we were building this product, we actually had a lot of customers that were pushing us this direction in the first place, and they were like already willing to pay quite a bit. And in hindsight, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Like in our space, the ROI is very clear. A lot of people just have large support teams, so
Yep.
it is a big part of their operation. But in the moment, it's hard to think like that. It's hard to rationalize, and so you just kind of go with what your customers are telling you, and like if they're legitimately pushing you towards something and they have willingness to spend, there's some signal there for sure.
You're very close to the customer. You're trying to figure out the initial shape of not just the product, but the product that they will pay for. What are you seeing today from customers in AI and customer support? Because customers, in my experience, and I'm not spending all day with customers focused on customer support, there's a really wide spectrum ranging from we want to be as close as we can to full autonomy to we want humans to touch everything and to have AI assisting the humans. So I'm just curious, what's the spectrum that you see when you go out and talk to customers?
Yeah. So the number one thesis that we built our company around is that yes, AI will make things more efficient and like make you save money and stuff like that. But really, it's fundamentally changing the customer experience, which will lead to actually more revenue, more retention, more conversions. And we found that ultimately that's what really excites customers. Like I think at this point, everyone knows that if you adopt AI, like things will get more efficient and you can save a lot of money, and people do care about that. But the thing that's really exciting and like really gets them interested in what we're building, and in many ways, our product is really optimized for this piece, which is like really transforming the customer experience, like giving them a completely new medium for them to interact with the product and with the company. And you should see like bookings going up, conversions going up, like upgrades going up, and like churn going down, and that's I think that's what really like fundamentally changes the business outside of just saving them money. So that's really what we're seeing in the space. I think a lot of agentic spaces are going to move towards this direction because it's kind of like saving money is table stakes now, which is kind of funny to say.
Yeah. When you go up and you talk to customers, are you seeing, I'm sure that they compare you to other customer support AI tools potentially. How much are you seeing the build versus buy decisions? Klarna made a really big splash with building their internal customer support AI tool and handling a lot of customer service chats. So I'm just curious, are you actually running into that or is it pretty rare?
In our case, it's pretty rare. I think it's pretty common that folks have done some exploration, at least internally, because especially if you're talking to a company that has a good engineering team, like someone will have explored this use case. But I think there's very few companies for which it makes sense for them to build it in-house. And they know this as well, because very quickly what you run into is like, okay, number one, you spin up a demo, it works well. Okay, in order for us to put this in front of customers, what needs to happen? And then you quickly realize there's like a huge long tail of stuff for it to be production ready, right? Like you have to have guardrails in place for hallucinations. You have to have like checks in place so that like, if bad actors come in, you're like, deflecting them correctly. You have to have like all the insights and reporting. You have to have like, we had a million conversations last month. Like what happened in them and can we use that to improve the performance? There's like all these things that happen afterwards that is just like does not make sense for people to build. It's not their core specialty, and that actually takes a while to build. And then the second big piece is that a lot of the value provided is actually molding the AI around someone's business logic. And so, say you're a big, car rental company or something like that, right? Like every single workflow that you can do for a customer, there's a lot of nuance behind it. And you probably already spent like years or decades like building up that like logic. And so someone has to like build that into the AI. And if you're doing in-house, like your engineers have to do each one of those one by one.
Mm.
Like they create their own framework for how to do it, which is also pretty difficult. And so at that point, it's like, okay, yeah, like it doesn't really make sense for us to do this in-house. I do think there's like some companies out there for which like they have the capability and it makes sense for them to spend a lot of time on it. like DoorDash maybe comes to mind, where it's like it's just supports such a big part of the operation and probably have like a ton of engineers building on it. So things like that.
Let's get into that layer that you build on top that you talked about. So keep me humble here. I saw that you pretty transparently write on your website how the agents flow together. So let me know if any of this has changed, but you have the core AI agent, which is kind of what you just talked about, that enterprise logic, the brain that handles the enterprise logic, and then routing. So how do you orchestrate from the agent to the human? Agent assist, so that will help the humans actually write the thing that they should be writing to customers. And then you have an admin dashboard and QA interface. Is that a fair description of the product today, or am I missing anything?
Yeah, so what you're describing is kind of this flywheel that we came up with after we've done so many of these deployments. I think
Yeah.
we realized that having a flywheel like that is actually very important for the AI to continue getting better. And if you're missing one of those pieces, then really you're not really like achieving the full potential of an agent that you're investing in. So yeah, those are the components. The core thing that we're building is the AI agent, and so like a lot of our work and like the special sauce, I guess, is the sort of agent itself that we're building. Like how do you make it easy to consume new logic and for it to learn new things and perform well and like be very reliable and consistent. But all these other pieces are very important for it to continue doing that. So yeah, like getting it over to a human, right? Like that's always going to be a fundamental part of this like flow for a while. And then the admin dashboard, that's kind of what I was describing. We built so much tooling for people to see what's going on in their conversations and so on. And yeah, I think that sort of flywheel, I think so far remained very true in all the new conversations we're having. Like people really resonate with being able to contextualize everything.
Let's talk about what goes into each of those components. So for the core AI agent, what goes into building and architecting it? You mentioned that some of these companies will have complex logic already internally. How does that then become part of Decagon?
Yeah, so you always have the core LLMs, right? So we're all building on LLMs.
And you're using just out of the box APIs right now, or how are you?
AI, Epic, we have some fine-tuned models as well for specific things. But I would say if you're building an application, like for sure, you should just use the best models. I think that's proven to be true, at least in the last couple of years. So yeah, there's that piece. And then sort of how do you consume logic? You really need a framework that you built to capture all these different abstractions that you could do, right? Let's like, I'll give an example. Let's say you're working with a credit card company and the flow is, hey, I lost my card, I need a new one. You probably have like a lot of steps involved to do that, right? Because you can't just be like, okay, here's your new card. You have to go look up their account. What cards are you talking about? Like, is it this one? It's like, okay, if I'm going to order you a new one, like, what's your address? Is this your address? Okay, no, it's not. All right, let me change your address. There's like basically all this stuff that has to go in there, and you basically need the building blocks on your end. So in this case, on our end, we provide the building blocks to really quickly teach the AI how to do this in a very reliable way, and that's where the magic happens because that allows the team, or in our case, like if we're doing it for you, to iterate super quickly, get the logic captured, and yeah, give them something that they can use very just like within a couple days.
So some of that logic, I assume, feeds into actual actions the agent has to take. So I don't know, like file this ticket for someone else to go deal with. How do you actually implement that?
You can kind of think of the agent as the agent's kind of there walking through the logic, right? And you give it tools for it to use to either look up data or take actions. Each tool you can kind of think of as like an API call. So it's either like a get request where you're fetching data, or it's a post where you're like taking action. And so in this case, you're just you go and you want to use the tool that corresponds with that action. Typically, you want to confirm with the user first, like, hey, I'm about to like do this. Like, is this what you expect? And then it can actually go and do the action for you.
What does it look like to actually do this implementation across customers? You said the word deployment, which makes me think that, syncing across data and across different logic leaps might be pretty hands-on. So what's generalizable across customers when you think about building this agent? And then what needs to be pretty custom?
Good question. We work almost entirely with larger companies. And so there is a deployment process involved, and we're very okay with that. The reason is because the larger your org, there's probably more logic and more setup and more integrations. The thing that's shared, there's like two things that are shared. One is that the shape of logic that people teach their AI is very consistent across companies, and actually is pretty consistent across industries as well, where it's just kind of a logical flow, right? It's like you probably have a list of steps, you probably have like a bunch of logic for when to take each step, like what to do afterwards, stuff like that. So the framework that we've developed to like process this logic is consistent, and so that makes it easy and like quick to set up new customers. The other thing that's shared is that generally the systems are the same. So there's not actually that many like unique integrations that you have to build. For example, if they're using a CRM, you probably want to integrate with that. There's only so many CRMs that people use.
Yeah, there's not some crazy long tail of data that you're dealing with for every customer.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think those are the two main things that are shared.
How do you think enterprise logic itself changes over time? Because now that you have this AI agent, maybe the scope of how you think about logic is different than when you're creating some logic set for humans. Or maybe your belief is that it's the same, which is okay too.
Yeah, we literally had a customer tell us this morning that because this sort of new flows that we made for them, we call them playbooks. Because of these new playbooks that we made for them, have been very successful. They've like literally changed the way that they're thinking about this org and like how they're planning out new playbooks, and like basically their like org planning is changing. I think that is good because now people are kind of thinking of things in a more agentic way. And when they plan out a new workflow, like, okay, maybe this part of their product didn't exist before, they're doing it with the AI in mind. And they're doing it in a way that's like much more structured and like modular. And that helps with the AI to learn it. And it also saves them a bunch of time because now they just taught the AI. They don't have to worry about, maintaining it going forward.
Do you see AI actually creating some of these logic flows over time, or do you think this will be something that remains pretty human?
Yeah. So one of the things that we think about is if you think about a really good human support agent, the logic kind of lives in their head. And if you need to update it, you just like talk to them. It's like, okay, next go do this, like do this instead. And then like, something in their brain updates and like now they have learned, right? So I think a similar thing will happen with agents. And that's an area where probably like we've been like super differentiated there so far, that we really invest in that step of giving it feedback and having an update instead of having to call us every single time. And again, we will often be the ones that like maintain things and update things for folks, but it's kind of this sort of feedback loop where the agent is already agentic talking to the customer, but there are agentic components that you could build on the other side of like teaching the agent how to do things. um, yeah, I think that's like a big area of research still. I think there's like a lot of things for people to do.
I saw some examples that you have like in your admin dashboard in QA that looks like the AI says something or maybe a human says something and you want to give feedback that the tone is off or whatever feedback it may be. So how do you, I know that it's still an area of research, but are you then fine tuning models or updating based on that data? How are you actually bringing the feedback back? What one way is through the logic steps, which we talked about, but another way might be on the model level.
There's a lot of things you could update. You could update the knowledge, you could update the prompts, you could update the models. It really depends on what the change needs to be. I'll give you an example. So one thing that we do now is when a bunch of conversations have happened, we will go through automatically with a separate model and figure out what is missing. Like, people are asking this thing and we just don't have enough knowledge about it, or like the AI is just unable to do this because like it just the context isn't there. And so it'll flag all those things. It'll tell our customer like, hey, here are the main gaps, and here's like roughly what percentage of conversations each one corresponds to. And so if you resolve this, like theoretically, you'd expect your resolution score to go up by that much. And we'll go even one step further. And for each of those topics, we'll look through what the human agents are saying and be like, oh, okay, like here's like a draft article that the AI wrote that like, should solve this issue. And our customers can just go through and like, approve them or whatever. And that's one way like things update, right? Because now it has learned how to do all these new things. So that's just one example. But yeah, I think we're very interested in building a system that's not just like good at answering questions after you set it up, but it's also good at getting better over time.
I love that because, in the flow, you have core AI agent and then you have this routing step. And, you have these great case studies like in Duolingo where you have 80% chat deflection. So you solve the majority of chat inquiries, and then some of it gets routed to humans. So one of the ways to close the gap, it sounds like, is you do that feedback and you have these models run and say, hey, you're missing this whole chunk. But if you fix that, like now we don't need to deflect those support tickets and we can handle it automatically. Is that right?
Yeah. And it could also be something like, hey, there's this like big use case that everyone seems to care about, and we're just unable to solve it because we don't have access to this like data. And
Yeah.
if you give it access, then all these things would be solved. And our customers really like that because like our goals are very aligned. Like our customers also want to solve more things, but sometimes they don't have the bandwidth or the tooling needed to like very easily figure out what are the things that should be improved next. And if you can just tell them, that's huge.
What are the typical things that you see in that gap that then gets routed to humans? So one of it is like maybe you're missing data, maybe you're missing context. Are there other common things that you see where you're like, the AI cannot handle this right now?
Yeah, you need to take action. You know, the ability to take the action yet. Another one could be maybe 90% of the volume is like pretty like straightforward, but there's like 3% that is like very heavily regulated, or like there's some legal implications, or it's about like fraud or something like that, and like you just don't want to get into it. It's like perfectly fine.
Yeah. Or like as a rule, we don't exchange money
Yeah.
and we make sure the human goes and does that whenever we give a refund, potentially at the beginning. Is there a challenge in identifying when to route? Like, what is the biggest challenge in routing itself?
I wouldn't say there's challenge per se, but it is different for customer to customer. That's one of the things that different customers of ours prefer different things. So some folks have more stringent rules around like when you can escalate, and like you really want to keep the escalation as low as possible. And like, before you can escalate, you have to, confirm a bunch of things with the user. And that's all behavior that's decided by our customers, right? We're not prescriptive about that. On the other end of the spectrum, it's like, if any of these 10 things are true, you got to escalate. Like if they say something like this, or they have this tone or whatever. So it's not really a hard problem. It's just you have to make it customizable for customer to customer.
Yeah. But it's not, once they set the rules for routing, it's not that it's challenging to then effectively route.
Yeah, exactly.
How about across modalities? Is that true when you're looking across text and voice? It's all kind of the same when it comes to routing?
Yeah, it is. Voice, there's like an extra dimension that could be interesting to you, right? So for example, if one of the things
See is one of the big issues.
Yeah, I mean, if one of the criteria for routing is tone and things like that, then that doesn't really come across necessarily in a text message. But if you can take the raw audio file and like volume, like, just, you can really hear the tone from someone. And if you have a good measure of that, that could be an input.
If you kind of had a fairy godmother that could give you a better model under the hood, is there something that you would wish for to then build on top of? So in other words, if you could improve the model that you're getting, what would you want the most? And I'll ask that both on text and on voice as separate questions.
Text. So the thing that we really care about from models is how good they are at following instructions. Let's say like someone, like a model just like perfect at following instructions. You give it like 100 instructions and it was perfect at all of them. That would be very good for our space, because a lot of our logic is around, describing what needs to be done to the AI and having it listen. There's other types of things that the model could improve, but I would say like by far that's the one that matters the most to us. Yeah, on voice, there's like a couple interesting things. So voice, the problem is more latency. And like everyone faces this problem, because if you're on chat, you respond within like 5-6 seconds. That's a very, very smooth experience. You probably don't really think about it at all. But on voice, if after everything you say, there's like a 5-6 second gap, it feels kind of off.
You start yelling at the phone.
Yeah, exactly. So I think like having cleaner solutions for that on the voice side is interesting. We have our own solutions right now, obviously. And
do you use filler words, or are you doing something else? Like how are you solving for latency in the interim while you don't have full control of the model?
the name of the game is, you have to start basically saying stuff pretty quickly, right? But if you just start filler words, it really does not feel natural. And actually it's like kind of obvious that's filler words. So there's like smart ways you can do like more optimistically starting to say stuff. And that's where a lot of our work is going.
Do you think that any of this flow that we talked about, so the core AI agent, the routing, the agent assist, the dashboard and QA interfaces, do you think any of them are going away anytime soon?
In our space, no. I think all of these things are important. And in our space, over the next couple of years, there's definitely going to be an improvement in the performance, but it's unlikely that there'll be no humans. In fact, I don't even think most customers of ours like want no humans. Like if you can still have like some humans overseeing things, like being an escalation path, that is a general positive in most cases because you kind of have the best of both worlds. So yeah, I think we have pretty high conviction, at least in the shape of our flywheel and the shape of the like how agents will work in the space.
We talked about continuous improvement and to your point, it getting better and better over time. And we'll talk about what humans will do as it gets better over time. But how do you actually like evaluate that it's going to work before it's in production and before you see that you have your model checking for the gaps? How do you do that?
Good question. Yeah, so this is a pretty well researched problem, right? Like there's a lot of companies trying to build in this space. I think the
Totally.
issue is that maybe the market isn't that large yet, but for us, like we would be a user of one of these. We've rolled out a lot of this technology ourselves. So first thing we want to do is kind of the classic like evals or like regression testing, where you simulate things and make sure that the answers are what you expect. Sometimes it's hard to evaluate those answers because it's just not like it does the output equal this because it's generative, and so you need like a generative eval. Another type is concept of red teaming, where you have basically potentially malicious or creative tests that run or using like what it knows about you, it comes up with like, okay, this might possibly break this, and does it break or not? So these are kind of tests that you can run beforehand before going live. And the main thing is what's really nice about our space is that it's very easy to break things up and incrementalize it. So let's say you have a big change coming, or it's your first time using us. You could first just roll it out to 5% of your users very easily, and then build up from there. It's not like an all or nothing thing. That is one of the main qualities of this space that makes it good, in my opinion, is that you have this like incrementality where you can, build things up sequentially and, iteratively instead of needing it to be perfect off the bat.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose with routing, like you could do 5% or classic A/B test, but you could also do just based on your confidence of AI handling a particular use case.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So, as this gets better and better, like what becomes the role of human agents?
Yeah. So the role of human agents, we give a lot of thought to because we want our differentiation to always be on the product side. And part of the product is building tooling for these folks and the people on the team. As our agents have been deployed more, one thing we've seen is that there's a lot of new work that emerges. And so one of those things is supervising the AI, right? And making
Yeah.
sure that it's doing well and has what it needs. And then there's people that will QA the AI and do quality assurance, monitoring, sample types of conversations, grade it to a rubric, and so on. We have like an auto QA feature now that like allows you to automatically QA things, and that is helpful because that allows you to give those people more leverage. So we give a lot of thought into like what these people will do. And there will probably be people whose job it is to like build logic into the AI. So similar to what I described, right? We've created this framework for people to build these building blocks, and there will probably be people on the team whose sole job it is to do that, which is not really that much a stretch. Like even right now in traditional models, if you're building like a giant decision tree using the older chatbot frameworks, there's probably people on your team that maintain that. And so now there's just going to be like kind of like AI supervisors, AI builders, AI like evaluators, stuff like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's this entire flow that we talked about, and there's a human basically making either guiding each part or making sure that each part doesn't break. One of the things that you had mentioned earlier is this feedback piece. Okay, like we'll change the tone here, or we need this data piece to make this part work. You'd mentioned that you do fine tuning on some models. I just want to get into like, is that where you're doing fine tuning? Or are you doing fine tuning in other areas too?
Yeah. So fine tuning, I think most people who are building applications have found that most of your gains are not going to be from fine tuning, but fine tuning can still be useful for certain things. So if you have a repeated task that's done again and again, and it's very specific to you or your use case, then fine tuning can help. It's also good for lowering costs, or you can fine tune a smaller model to do something repeatedly, and you don't need all the intelligence of a bigger model. It's not something we focus too much on right now, but it is. Yeah, it's obviously like a tool in your toolbox.
How about across sectors? So if you're dealing with, I don't know, like new vocabulary in healthcare or in finance, how do you deal with those moving industries? Or do you kind of get that data natively from each company? And so that's good enough.
Yeah, I don't really think that like you can do that. I don't think that's going to be a huge difference maker. Most of the difference comes from the company specific data, and also you just get a lot more from using the closed source models that are the most intelligent.
One of the things you said at the very beginning was that a lot of folks who think about customer support as a cost center, you see it as a revenue opportunity. I'd love to hear just more on that. Like, how do you maintain slash build relationship quality when you're scaling with AI interfacing a lot more with customers?
What you'll notice from large enterprises is that a lot of them treat their customer support operation as like a cost center. It's kind of there. It's not really critical to their plans in the future. And yeah, I think that's a little bit unfortunate. I can like kind of understand how that came to be, but there are like two reasons why it's unfortunate. One, your customer is really important. Like every leadership team really cares about their customers, and so they want to put a lot of effort into it. But it just feels like, oh, this is not going to make us more money, or it's not going to like change our growth trajectory. The second is that from a product perspective, most of the insights will come from your customers, and that's if you can get that working well. Like if you can really harmonize the product team with the customer team, there's just like so much learnings and insights and just like building that can be done through that. And so our view is it's really important to make the customer team like a central part of both, executive decisions and product decisions. And having a good AI agent is a great bridge for that because it can add a lot of efficiency. But to your point, and what I mentioned earlier on is that if you're doing your job well, it can change the growth trajectory because you have this like differentiated experience now for the customer, and they'll like you more. If it's really easy and good, it'll lead to more like of the like good behavior that you want from customers, like booking things and like upgrades and things like that. And so you really want to treat it as like a concierge, right? Like in its purest form, it's a really good AI concierge. It's there for your customer whenever, and if it's doing its job well, you're basically expanding the pie from what your customers can do because the experience is so good. And so when you talk to C-suites, like that really is exciting because they mostly worry about the growth of the company, right? Like how are we going to make more money? How are we going to grow faster? And so that's a big piece. And on the second point around harmonizing product, yeah, if you have a good AI agent and you have the tooling around it, you had a million conversations last month. Like what happened in those conversations? If the AI agent can read everything and tell you and categorize things for you, find gaps, find trends, it's really insightful for the product folks. And now they're much more involved. So yeah, it's like a good spot to be in if you have a good AI agent.
What's the implication then for the business model? Because, you mentioned maybe today some people think of this as a cost center. So if I were to give the naive guess, it would be, okay, like agents, you can kind of replace like the cost of labor. But if you're growing revenue over time, of course, that looks different. And so maybe we'll talk about your pricing today. I know you have per conversation pricing, per resolution pricing, and then your pricing in the future, which may look like this or may look different.
The pricing is generally tied to the work output of the AI. And that's how most agents will be priced. I don't think that's like a hot take.
By the way, I don't think it's a hot take, but I think it's like a hot implementation, if that makes sense. Like, I think people say that, but that's not really the pricing that the world has adapted to.
True. I think that's also because there's haven't been that many like real agents that have gotten adoption. And so in our space, where there is at least some level of adoption now, I think customers find it very intuitive to price it based on number of conversations or volume. So it can either be like total number of conversations or the number of conversations you resolve. In either case, you're probably committing to like annually. I think we're gonna have this many, so I'm gonna pay you for that much. And if you go over, it's just per item, per resolution versus per conversation. I mean that's getting kind of the weeds. We don't really have strong preference. Most of our customers have preferred the per conversation cost because it's much more predictable, and then you don't have to have don't have to have a discussion of what is a resolution.
Yeah.
Like one's really upset and they came in and they just left. Like, is that a resolution? Probably not. Like, do you want to incentivize your vendor to be like pushing resolutions as much as possible. So that's what happens. But in general, value is tied to the work that's being done, and I think people find that very, very intuitive.
So you think in the long term, that value tied to the work being done could also potentially capture revenue expansion?
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, the traditional SaaS model is you're just charging per seat, right? You're charging for like how many people can use this product, and like the product is providing some value to each of them. So that's great. Nowadays, it's a lot easier to quantify how much work is being done because like the agent's expectation is to do the whole job. And so, yeah, it's like how much work are you saving? And to your point, like how much new opportunities are you generating? And tying that to the pricing makes a lot more sense.
Well, I think this is one of the beauties of choosing customer support too as the area where we focus because it's very measurable. And so I'm curious when people evaluate Decagon as a product, like of course there's the standard metrics and there's CSAT and NPS and things that folks care about in customer support world. But are there any new metrics that they introduce or that they look at when like evaluating AI focused customer support?
Exactly. I would totally agree that our space is very measurable, and that is like a nice thing because people can make business cases very easily. So what is the resolution rate? What's the customer satisfaction? I would say for AI, maybe a new one would be like an accuracy rate type situation where you can have human agents like QAing stuff and giving it some sort of score. But the first two are the most common ones.
Are there areas as you've developed the product that, relative to when you started and you knew that you were building for customer support, relative to the shape of the product now that have surprised you?
Not really. I mean, one thing that surprised us is that a lot of our buyers are like super sophisticated about evaluating stuff like this. Definitely did not expect that going in. And I mean, to their credit, they are part of like very strong organizations. But
Well, and it's their customers, right? Like their reputation is on the line in many ways in how they interact with their customers. So it's a really important thing to evaluate and to get right.
exactly, yeah, totally agree. And so, like, what the most sophisticated folks will do is like, okay, here is my current solution. Here are my current human agents, and I'm considering some like new potential solutions, right? So they'll pick us and maybe some other folks, and they'll just put everyone side by side. So it's like, and again, that's also something that this space enables is that the shape of the customer support, customer service problem is one where you can like separate it easily. And so it could be like, oh, Decagon is 25%, and the incumbent is 25%. Is like whatever. It's like you actually run it in production for some amount of time, and then you gather real stats. And yeah, I think that was surprising because we didn't expect buyers to like just go that hard on because like that is like the most rigorous experiment you could possibly run.
Totally. It's just
But
like we will look at your performance and the numbers will tell us what to do.
yeah, and we really embrace that. I think so far we've done very well on those, and that is a nice quality to have so that you're actually like selling and convincing people based on like real results rather than my product could do this or that.
Is there anything that surprised you as the underlying AI models have gotten better? Like how much do you feel that in product improvement and how much do downstream customers feel those changes?
I would say since we started, there have been a bunch of new models that came out. All of them have been improvements for sure. None of them have been like, holy crap, this changes the way the product works.
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah. Whether that will change in the future, who knows? It's like hard to know what the models will do. But I would say in our case, like models getting better is definitely a plus. Models getting cheaper is like for sure a plus. It doesn't really seem like most of the hard stuff that we're building is not really related to the models. It's like how can you teach the agent new things? And that will need to be there regardless of the models that are used.
Is there anything you're particularly interested in on the how to teach the models to do new things, whether it's frameworks, whether it's research, but since that's an area that you care about a lot for your product?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to hear from you if you've seen other folks do this in any other space, because I think this is just like a very open area. This is the area that we've invested in the most, and oftentimes when customers choose us, it is related to this concept, which is we just like have so much to teach the agent, and for it to perform well, it has to have a good mechanism for this learning to happen. And yeah, it just has to go in. Because I was kind of thinking about this relative like the coding space where people are building coding agents. Like I don't think that space has this quality where for each customer you have to teach it a bunch of new stuff. Like it's probably like maybe you have to ingest your code base, but like I don't know. And maybe there is a learning process, but
This is part of why I was curious about the things like tool use, right? Because this is one of the areas where if you have multiple steps that involve tool use, the aggregated error that something can go wrong increases. So all the things that we had talked about, like can you evaluate, in other areas like code gen, where you see some of these models that are not code assistant, but are instead, let me go make like a 0 to 1 app and come back to you. You need to both eval each step of the process, but also like the end to end output. And it just becomes a more complex problem. So I think in your case, like maybe you have a customer support bot where each part of the conversation is a different step, but maybe for a given thing, you have to go and implement many steps at once. And I think that's where just like accumulated error becomes a challenge.
yeah, that's fair. But even in that case, you don't have to like teach it a bunch of new stuff. That's more like you're having it do different things and you can monitor and eval. But like let's say you're selling that to 10 different customers, it's probably like roughly the same structure for each customer. Whereas for us, if it's 10 different customers, like each of them probably has tens or hundreds of workflows, and like all of them are different. So you just have to have like a way to teach it.
Yeah. I guess that's fair. My point is, maybe, I mean, you mentioned that a lot of the data sources are the same, but like maybe tools across customers look different. As such, to do evaluation of like an end-to-end flow that involves different tools and different API calls becomes more complex.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
We didn't talk a lot about your team, but it sounds like, some of your values are customer centricity, and we talked about discovery. So what do you look for when you're hiring your team at Decagon? I'll ask a more personal note too, which is how do you inspire them to follow you on this journey?
The people we're looking for, we just want people that we would all enjoy spending time with, first of all, because that's important. We're in the office 5 days a week at least, and that makes it so that like if you're in here for long hours, you really want to enjoy being next to the people around you. So far, I think we've done a good job of that. We've been pretty selective or like careful about hiring. So that's the first quality. Second quality, obviously, you have to be like super good at what you do. If that's sales or engineering, we just want like people who are killers and can really aggressively get the job done. And honestly, if you're good at those two things, like yeah, you're probably going to be a good cultural fit at least. And then it's just we have our interview process. I don't think our interview process is like anything like super different from other good tech companies. In terms of inspiring people, so yeah, I don't know. I think we have a good vibe in the culture, and we have a good culture going right now, where like people really enjoyed the work that we're doing because we spent a lot of time making sure everyone understands like the impact of their work, like going towards the customer. This is like you did this thing, and like holy crap, the customer was like, oh, this is like awesome, like made a big difference. And when people are working hard, but they feel like everything that they're doing, it leads to something good. It leads to like customers being really happy, or it leads to like new business or whatever. It's
It's
really easy to do
motivating.
it. Exactly. So that's probably the key.
I just have to ask because I didn't ask you, but Vic told me I have to ask. Why did you choose the name Decagon?
Oh yeah. So Decagon, it's a 10-sided shape. I grew up doing a lot of math. We like math terms. The main impetus for it is that we were really interested in the concept of like a 10x employee. So like how people say 10x engineers, they're like people that are just like so good at what they do. They're like worth 10 engineers.
I love it.
It's not like a hyperbole, but for us, we were interested in like, okay, if you have a good AI agent, you can be at least 10x of the whatever role it's doing because it's so much faster. It's like cheaper. It's more efficient, like learns things better, and you don't have to like retrain it and things like that.
So I'll just ask one last personal question, which is how have you changed as a person and as a leader since starting Decagon? I know it's your second company. Want to hear how things have changed?
I think Ashwin and I have just gotten older. Like we're more like don't get too high, don't get too low. It's like I think we have like more maturity. I think with my first company, that was not the case. I was new grad. It's like really easy to get super happy or super sad about different things. And I think everyone goes through that when they're like, regardless of what you're working on, like as you get older, like stuff like that becomes easier. So, and we're also a lot better at appreciating things because our first companies, like we had pretty good outcomes, but like very tough journeys. And when you've gone through that, then like stuff doesn't seem that bad, like normally. So I think we have a lot more perspective and we feel a lot more appreciative of when things are going well.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, I love it. Congrats on all the success and thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's great chatting with you.